Hello again. We previously discussed how two new species within the bear kind were produced through natural selection, polar bears and grizzly bears. But is it genetically possible for a fish to transform into a human? Evolutionists ask us to imagine that given enough time, a fish can transform into a human. Really? Let's take a look. God said, "Let the earth produce living creatures according to their own kind." God's command to produce within kind still stands today. Evolutionists correctly point out that natural selection produces new species within their kind. But then they ask us to imagine that natural selection can also produce new kinds. In his famous book, The Greatest Show on Earth, The Evidence for Evolution, Richard Dawkins devotes 124 pages to detailing 28 reasons why he believes that evolution can transform a fish into a human. Natural selection can sometimes increase and sometimes decrease the coloration of male guppies. Dawkins presents this as evidence that evolution can transform a fish into a human. Wild mustard has been cultivated into cabbage, broccoli, cauliflower, kale, Brussels sprouts, collard greens, savoy, kohlrabi, and other vegetables. These are the same plant, but look at the variety of ways it can be grown. Dawkins presents this as evidence that evolution can transform a fish into a human. Dawkins gives other evidence that evolution can transform a fish into a human. He submits the following facts, all of which are true. That wolves were bred into many dog breeds, and racehorses and greyhounds were bred for athletic prowess. That dogs have been bred to have sheep herding skills, and cows have been bred for larger milk production. That wild roses were bred into the roses we know today, while wild sunflowers were bred into the sunflowers that we know today. Or that foxes have been bred to be dog-like. Or elephant tusk weight decreased due to poaching. Or lizards on an island underwent changes, but we're still lizards. Every one of these examples is a change within the biblical kind, change that fits well within a six-day creation only a few thousand years ago. This, however, is very weak evidence for Dawkins' claim that evolution can change fish into people. Be very cautious. Evolutionists commonly use the true parts of evolution as proof that the false parts of evolution are also true. Dawkins gives additional evidence that evolution can transform fish into people, because most scientists believe that to be true. But truth is not decided by majority vote. Furthermore, in this case, those voting are biased. They reject the possibility of miracles before they begin to examine the evidence. They don't reject creation based on evidence, but based on their biased presuppositions. Most of Dawkins' evidence shows natural selection producing change within kind. Dawkins is correct. Natural selection really does produce change within kind. Unfortunately, evolutionists go further. Evolutionists claim that natural selection can and has produced new kinds. They claim that 3.5 billion years of natural selection produced all of the Earth's plants and animals from a single bacteria-like common ancestor. The bacteria in your gut is your distant cousin. And yes, evolutionists actually say things like that. What evidence does Dawkins provide as proof that natural selection can produce new biblical kinds? He asks us to imagine that rabbits descended from shrew-like creatures. He tells us to think what might be achieved in 10 or 100 million years. He asks, why shouldn't it be possible? Each of Dawkins' 6 reasons that evolution can produce new kinds is his request that we imagine it to be possible. But asking us to imagine something is very, very weak evidence. Each of Dawkins' 28 reasons why evolution can turn fish into people is very weak. The evidence given for millions of years can sound very compelling, but when closely examined, most of it is very weak evidence. Moving on. Evolutionists assume that all plants, animals, and people descended from the first living thing. They sketch a tree of life depicting this imagined family lineage. A real plant or animal is placed on the tip of each branch. The proposed ancestor of those creatures is placed at the point where their branches meet. At the point where the branches of two different kinds of creatures meet, evolutionists almost always place an imagined creature. For example, the imagined common ancestor of apes and people is an ape-like creature. Evolutionists usually think that living things slowly change over millions of years. Amazingly, most evolutionists now think that the change from one kind of creature to a new kind of creature happened very fast, in fact only in a few generations. They imagine this happened quickly because very few, if any, fossils show this change happening. Evolutionists call this imagined fast change of one kind into another kind punctuated equilibrium. In contrast to the evolutionist tree of life, a different tree of life can be drawn based both on the truth God reveals in Scripture and on what we observe about the world around us. This would actually be a forest of trees, and each tree represents one kind of animal God created during creation week. Starting at creation, these trees would grow and possibly branch due to natural selection until the Noahic flood caused some extinctions, ending some branches and even many complete trees. Many marine kinds, such as trilobites, became extinct, probably due to Noah's flood. The trees representing animal kinds that survived the flood aboard Noah's Ark would continue to grow after the flood. And many of these trees would branch out as some kinds diversified into multiple species through natural selection. The dozens of cat species alive today probably came from a single cat kind on Noah's Ark. So notice the difference. The evolution story takes all the trees from the forest of life and combines them into a single tree. Here we see again how evolution is partly true and partly false. The individual trees in the forest of life are the true part. Combining them into a single tree is the false part. Now, we've talked of many things, but a summary thought is this. Natural selection really does produce new species, but the evolution story imagines that natural selection can also produce new kinds, even though that has never been observed. That's our lesson. Until the next time, God bless.